at least with the panel discussion at the end there.
Yeah,
and then we can just
a bit
cut
more
that.
flexible.
Yeah, we can shorten that if we need to. Good. Right. Yeah, okay. Oh. Okay, right, thanks very much. Okay, my name's Steve Aldridge. I'm the Head of Infrastructure at the University of Liverpool. And I'll be joined by my colleague there, Mark Suffield, from the dark side. He's from the estates side. I've got a bit of sympathy. They've had a few jokes thrown at them today, but I've spent about 20 years doing IT at the University of Liverpool, but before that I did 20 years as a highway engineer. So I know the sort of problems that they've got, and it sort of helped me out with this process. So, right, what we're going to kick off a few things. Just to set some context, I just want to put a few stats about the University of Liverpool, because I think size does matter. And some things that work in some departments and other sites don't work in others. So just if you want to compare what your site's like compared to ours. So there's a bit of jargon in there. FRCS is our Facilities, Residential and Commercial Services. That's a merged department. I don't know how common this is, but that was something that took place 18 months ago. CSD is the IT side of things. 22,000 students, 5,500 staff, and a £600 million capital programme, of which there's £250 million in student accommodation. So you can tell how far behind the curve we were with that one, so that's been a major concern. We have got a campus on the Wirral, as well as our city centre campus in Liverpool, and there's also a satellite facility that we've got down in Finsbury Square in London, which is a bit unusual, but there's a few other universities doing that sort of thing. Just to go through what we've got on here, background to the changes, the drivers. Mark's going to talk about BizRia soft landings, which some people might know about, but this was all new to me. Mention what the outcomes were, next steps, and just a quick flash through some of the documentation that we've used. Okay, so this is part of what we were faced with here. Unlike some universities, the facilities team did have some IT people in there. They grew up from running their own plotters, AutoCAD stuff, local IT applications and all the rest of it, but it certainly didn't involve any systems management. They had no experience at all of the sort of things that an IT department would be doing with integrating systems. The legacy equipment that was used by FRCS, and some of it still is in that state, certainly not IP based, and operated as individual systems. So this is pretty common across most university estates. The other things we tended to find out here, and it's not really a poke at the suppliers, they tended to exaggerate in our experience what their systems could do. And A, you might be saying this so they can sell you something, but B, I think part of it was innocence. Because something that was working on a small scale doesn't necessarily work on a big scale. And we found umpteen examples of people trying to bring their equipment onto our site, trying to get it to work on a multi-VLAN network, and they didn't have a clue. So the other thing that we've got hanging around the back there is this capital programme. We had to get that right. And it was because it was embarking on such a programme of work, it was essential that we had to get some methodology in place there. Put this down here, wheel reinvention is a popular activity, not just in Liverpool, everywhere. And again, I don't think this is out of choice for a lot of people. They don't talk to enough people, same as people in IT don't do that. And the more of this you can eliminate, the better. The other side of it, which we noticed there, was each of these sort of big projects that has happened in the past, or even small refurbishments, they were done in isolation. So you weren't necessarily learning best practice from one project to another. And the other side of it there, which we found when we did some cross-campus IT projects, was that once you started looking horizontally as well as vertically, you uncovered all sorts of things there that you needed to take into account that you didn't know about. These sort of things come up when we introduce a managed print service, for example, and produce a unified staff card. Quite surprising what goes on across the campus that you never get to hear about unless you do cross-campus projects. And then the other side of it, we'd already transferred the AV and telephony teams to CSD from what was known as FM, Facilities Management, because of technology trends. CSD's got a staff of about 130, which I think is quite lightweight for the numbers of the universities, but we still had a broader breadth of experience than people in FM did. Okay, so the drivers there. We needed to make sure that user requirements were being met on capital projects, and this has been hammered home today. IT requirements, again, this is another common theme we've heard today. They weren't fully scoped out. People think that they can easily be retrofitted. Typical examples on our particular site was we converted the old Royal Infirmary. There's no way on earth you're going to go back into a Grade 2 listed building and start banging trunking onto the walls and all the rest of it. But these are the sort of things that do happen. Too much reliance again on subcontractors, what I'm calling imperfect input, and basically they didn't have the breadth of experience, or they thought that standards never changed. So they'd come here, well, that's what we did last time we came, what are you moaning about? By the looks of a few smiles in the audience, that's rung a few bells there. Again, this is another one that was sort of aggravated the IT people. Value engineering, fantastic term. It's a disaster in a lot of respects, and the wrong things were being identified as candidates for value engineering. Prior to this formal adoption of the capital plan, we were finding that different systems were being installed in different buildings, and the classic one that I think Mark and myself touched on in the first case was 3 buildings going up at the same time, probably about £80 million worth of investment, and as it turned out we were going to end up with 3 different CCTV systems in them. So luckily Mark's boss said, right, we've had enough of that, get your heads together, pick the best one, and that's what will be the standards for them. So again, that's not untypical. This one here was always a bugbear for the IT people. We always ended up on the critical path. This is, again, something that's been hammered home today. It's also happened at the end of the summer. Any time that was lost in the project now became the fault of the IT people. And, of course, you're trying to get these things done for the start of term when we all had too much to do anyway. So it was a very stressful time. On our side of things, we couldn't carry on doing some of the installations in the way that we'd done in the past. We used to install Wi-Fi heads ourselves. When you start getting into these projects, it doesn't work, so we have to change the way we were doing things. And then, as everybody else has said today, because everything's moving onto the data network, we need to provide some advice and input on that. It's not going to come from FRCS or their suppliers. So I'm going to hand over to Mark now. He's going to talk about soft landings, and this is part of the methodology that we use to try and solve some of these problems.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon. For a state, because he's noticed the tie. Thanks, Paul. He's gone anyway. My name is Mark Suffield. I'm the Engineering Strategy Manager for the University of Liverpool. My background was in maintenance. I'm a chartered engineer. My background was in maintenance. I was maintenance manager at the university for a number of years before I was headhunted, moved sideways, whatever, into the capital projects team to work with the project managers mainly on capital projects, but generally our project team. What we did is, when I started in the new role, I was looking for a methodology that I could use to try and improve generally the engineering standards, commissioning, witnessing, handover, all the elements that we found were causing us problems on projects. And I came across this. Some of my estates colleagues may be familiar with BISRIA, certainly with BISRIA, and I came across soft landings as a methodology. It is very much a methodology. It's an outline framework. So we work to develop the soft landings methodology. Primarily, it's focused on ensuring that buildings perform in use. It's based on a long history of poorly performing buildings. But when we did some work on some pilot projects, other aspects of the building operation came into focus. Specifically things like, well, the computers don't work. Why don't the computers work? Because we didn't involve IT at an early stage. BMS systems required connections to the IP network. They weren't configured correctly. What's a MAC address? Well, I know all of these things now, but I didn't at the time. And neither the contractors weren't aware of the requirement to provide this information. So CCTV systems that didn't work, door access systems that didn't work. And again, you know, as has been said many times today, I thoroughly agree with all of the, we've experienced all of those things. And this is really where we started looking at possibly utilising my work on other aspects of the engineering infrastructure and the engineering side of projects, capital projects, to see if we could start looking at the IT systems. So it is a structured methodology. It's very much the baseline document is very much a framework. So we did a lot of work, I personally did a lot of work with Steve as well, looking at the IT sections, but how we actually look at user involvement, defining requirements. It's really about operational outcomes. And for me, that's a business continuity and a customer service element. There's a big focus on that. Because really what you want to do if somebody's moving into a new building, you want to sit them down at the desk and get them working. That's what we're paying for. Whether they're students or researchers, whatever, we're paying for that. If they can't work, that's a business continuity. That's actually a waste of resources. So there's a whole series of things that sort of complement the core functionality of this methodology, which is basically to ensure those buildings perform in use, energy-wise, really. So it takes everything through. There's a full section that takes you right through from the beginning of project feasibility, right through to extended aftercare. Now we focus very much in the early part of the implementation of soft landings on what I would call the core problem areas, which is pre-handover and immediate post-handover, so immediate occupation of the building. So 3 months before and 3 months after. It has a knock-on effect, and certainly things on IT when we're looking back at the project and saying actually the IT should have been involved much earlier in the design stages. And so we've moved outwards from that centre core area. But it was a core area where we identified where all these problems were, people unable to operate systems correctly. So it's focused on design and planning, directly related to, like I said, the operational outcomes. How does the building work in use? So we sort of focused in on this and started looking at the IT aspects of it. So problems to fix the user input, so feasibility, and obviously it's been mentioned several times today, get the IT involved early. I frequently remind project managers and design teams to when did you last speak to CSD? We had a review 3 months ago, right, okay, get them back in again. I want you to talk to them, I want you to just check everything, let's make sure they've got the standards, make sure that their specifications meets our design guidance, let's make sure there's no T's left uncrossed, I's left undotted. So we have users again, and this is something Steve will touch on again, because this idea of the users really don't understand exactly what they're asking for, and that goes down to things like CCTV requirements, you know, the MAC address issue, why do you want those? Well, we need them. Why? Don't ask, just give us them. The IT requirements were often driven by this idea of wanting one of those rather than what you're trying to achieve. So people aren't familiar with it, they just want what they had last time. We have come across this in laboratories all the time. I'd like a new fume cupboard. What sort of fume cupboard do you like? Just one like that's 30 years old but new. And you'll get this sort of, because that's what they're used to. They don't actually are not aware of the changes in technology. And that applies to IT as well as a whole range of other engineering and user equipment areas. And again, this idea that certainly project teams, project managers, contractors, and indeed users really have got no idea of what's happening in the back office. I would say the back office, to try and integrate these, what they're actually having installed into the wider context. So in my strategic role, really, I'm looking at how those things work, how the building management system integrates with our existing building management system, how the IT will work, how the CCTV will match the requirements of CSD to enable us to do storage of images and viewing of images, how the door access system will operate. And again, this is a very common one. I think it's been touched on once today, but project managers will be one of my areas of concern on soft landings, and something I've been working on with user groups and project managers, is to try and make sure that user representatives understand things like the RIBA stages of work. It's very difficult to get users engaged when there's no building in sight and no prospect of a building in sight. But little do they realise that the important design decisions are taken way before that building starts on site. And if they are not engaged and you don't inform them and ensure that they are aware of those processes, in addition to things like understanding how to look at drawings, most people will just nod their heads and go, yeah, that's fine. They have no concept of what that actually looks like in 3D. But you need to have that training. So there's an element of user training now that we try and instill into our project managers and construction teams, well before this project gets to tender. So the benefits, what we're doing is about getting those designers and users involved at an early stage, understand them, get them understanding, have reviews, design reviews, specifically on focusing on areas such as IT, but also all the other interaction systems. Who do you want to get into the building? How are you going to get in? What's the access strategy? Is this okay? Is this going to work for you? Do you want it changed? If we need it changed, do we need any hardware? Is there an IT implication for that hardware? And again, it's trying to get those designers to understand actually how the building is going to work in use, and trying to get the users to start thinking about how they're going to use the building. Two very alien concepts, believe me, to both parties in some respects. And again, this is all about improving the experience of users when they first occupy that building, because this is their experience of that first few days of occupation will taint it. The example I quite often use is you've bought a new house, it's 100 miles away, you've got a removals van full of, and a car full of screaming kids, and you turn up, it's pouring with rain, and the key that the estate agent left you doesn't fit the door. It doesn't really matter then. Okay, you might sort it out in a couple of hours, but those 2 hours have ruined your experience of moving into this building. And what we're trying to aim for here is excellence in that first occupation, that experience of moving into this new building or refurbished building, whatever. So I'll hand over to Steve, who's going to touch on the IT benefits related to this.
Okay, right. We've got a couple of changes, not too far to go now. Big benefit to us. We made sure that the IT is in the capital project cost. Again, seems patently obvious, but the amount of times that went wrong in the past is incredible. We're in the thick of it now. One of the good things that we found there is a lot of our essential IT equipment is actually installed in the main contract. So some people talk about the AV being outside of the main contract. Getting our networking in there has been great. Just took the pressure off us at that point. The value engineering, we get to say stuff about it. So that again stops these silly mistakes happening. And then there's this other one, no nasty surprises of finding that somebody's they've got a building with an HPC, high performance computing cluster going in there. Nobody's told us anything about it. So, getting near the end now. What happened on site here, the 2 posts that I referred to earlier are now part of CSD. And I'd like to sort of emphasise this bit here. This is something that worked well on our site. It's not a criticism of somebody else doing different things. I'm well aware of other universities have got strong IT teams in the facility side of things. If it works well, stick with what you're doing, because what you find out is a hell of a lot of work involved trying to get these methodologies set up, and if something that you've got on site is working well, there's no need to change it. Closer cooperation between CSD technologists and the project managers. We've enabled continuous improvement, and I mean a lot of people talk about that, but it has actually worked. One of the first big residences we put up, we had a nightmare at the end of the project because of not being handed over cabling details by the contractor who left the site early. We made sure that didn't happen, and the other 2 that followed on were big projects, 1,000-bedroom residences, went like clockwork on that sort of respect. We found here that procurement was cheaper for buying the IT kit via our suppliers and then free issuing it to the contractors. There's a note there that obviously you need to be careful there. If the contractors break the stuff, you need to have something in place to make sure they replace it. But that's worked really well for us. And finally here, we've got an IT strategy group that's been set up, not necessarily to do with just capital projects, but to just talk about IT in general, the requirements of people in FRCS. Mark touched on it before, that there's a lot of things goes on in the background, and people might buy a piece of software thinking it'll talk to our finance system, and it doesn't. There's a lot of work involved there, and they need programmers to do that sort of work. And it's these sorts of things we're looking at now, and that again is working particularly well. So the next steps and the documentation I'm going to hand over to Mark, and then we'll be finished with that.
Really do share the workload here, have you noticed? Okay. Well, the documentation we're referring to here is I've adopted a particular methodology as associated with software analysis to look at design guidance for all M&E systems in the university, which is not specification. I'll stress it's not a specification. It's design guidance. It's intended to provide background information and preferences and requirements on all the engineering systems in the university. And when Steve has adopted that, when we started looking at the IT elements of the various guidance. So it's a structured documentation system. I'll show you an example in a moment. Again, it's about project management skills is a key factor, ensuring that we've got that single point. Somebody else mentioned it today about having that single coordinator, and we've developed, and Steve is developing in the CSD, the idea of a coordinator approach. So that is the single point of contact for a project team. They are nominated at the beginning of a project, and they do all the internal communications, so network systems, etc., all goes through one person. So the project manager doesn't have to worry as long as this person understands or is involved regularly. It saves lots and lots of people having to sit around the table. Not to say that those specialists aren't involved at various stages, but the idea of a project manager, project coordinator in CSD has worked very well. Again, the University's capital programme is continuing to develop. We're just in the middle of a review of our estates strategy, which is very much now going to be academic-led rather than estates-led. So we're in the early stages of consultation with university stakeholders in our various faculties, and we're looking then at trying to match our estates strategy to their priorities. And again, the key IT infrastructure will come out of that process, and we'll be heavily involved with Steve in looking at how that affects their investment programme. Yeah, we need to obviously look at that in the context of long lead items. So if we have got long lead items and the procurement processes associated with that. We are in a process of looking at a whole range in a separate group, which involves CSDs, looking at some of our older CCTV. We've still got a mixture of analogue and IP CCTV. So there's a number of systems being brought up to a standard with the possibility of looking at system integration in the next few years. So there's another little project that's going to be extremely interesting. So building management, again, is part of the system integration, really, starting to look at how we can bring all these systems into a single front end. Anybody who's done that, I welcome any comments. I'm sure it's not an easy process. I know Warwick did quite a lot of work some while ago. Bristol had done a big, quite a large project on integration, I think, in the past. So monitoring of IT services, which again is this idea of trying to look at resilience in the IT network and bring that to be more focus on ensuring that because these systems are mission critical now, so we can't afford to have CCTV go down, door access. Building management systems have critical alarms, flood alarms, all sorts of things on critical environmental conditions, for example, that alert us out of hours, and that's all on the CSD, all on the data network now. And this is again sort of relevant to particularly BMS. We have people accessing the systems from outside, so we have to be very cognizant of the security of the systems and try to develop a single points of access through the firewall. secure systems of access through the firewall is becoming more and more relevant. This is just an example of the front end of the format that we've used for, or that's been adopted by CSD on the back of the format I've developed for our design guidance on other systems. So we categorise information, recognising that I'm not trying to do. The reason we don't specify, or I don't call it a specification, is because my view is that consultants are paid to write a specification. They should write a specification in accordance with your guidance, but if you give them a specification, that's what will get issued. They won't even read it. Particularly if it's long, and I've noticed several people have said we keep them short. Well, we keep these short too. So it's about trying to give them some indication of what we're after without telling them how to write the specification. That's what they're supposed to do. I'm not sure they always do it to our satisfaction, but that's what you're paying them for. So there's just an example that I extract from that. So you'll see the blue category here, which just shows you that that's an information. It's just a general information, background information to support, so people understand what we're trying to get at. And then we've got some specific requirements in red, and obviously there are categories for a yellow category as perhaps a preference or an option, and we've got this green functional stated functional requirement. So we're not really bothered how you do it, but we want it to do that. So I'm trying not to stifle innovation with these guides. So if they can come up with a better way of doing things, they just need to tell us how they've done it. So. We have some documentation. Somebody else mentioned the project initiation form or a mandate, whatever. This is obviously something that we now have adopted, so we can get the bare bones and the objectives sorted out up front very clearly before. So we've got something to measure our successes against, and then we've got some elements of within the documentation now, things like handover certification. So trying to improve, again, on the back of really what I've been doing on commissioning of M&E systems elsewhere, is the similar sort of thing. We make sure that the IT elements are correctly done. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Actually,
me or Steve?
Actually, I've got two, one each actually.
All right, come on, Steve. You're not out the woods yet.
You mentioned the users is something that it's quite critical because they are the ones who are going to live in the building, and you very clearly say that some of them can't read the drawings or understand what's in front of them. I think we had the same problem, and we now use what we call the user coordinators, which is someone that comes from the faculties and are always responsible on all of the projects to represent the faculty on the projects. Is it something that you would consider doing or you thought about doing already?
One of the things that I think universities are particularly bad at, having witnessed this so many times now, is stakeholder management. Quite often, user representatives are nominated without any real recognition of what that means. They're expected to do their own job, and then they're expected to do the coordination. And I think what we're trying to work towards is a clear, almost like a role description for a user representative, to make it clear to the faculties how important their input is and what we expect them to do. Because in reality, and I've said, and I'm sure you have sat around many project team meetings with a couple of bemused users, nodding their heads, not really understanding what is really going on, and they are then expected, or are they? Has anybody actually told them what they need to do next? What tends to happen is they come to the next meeting and there will be an item that says they were asked to provide feedback, and they just go, yeah, it's fine. And you've got they've got no idea, and the project manager goes, oh, right, great, tick the box, away we go, and we're off. And the architect goes, all right, thanks. And we're off on the next stage, and that's it then. And nobody ever goes back to them and asks them about that element again, until they realise, when somebody's speaking to them 6 months or 12 months later, that they shouldn't have said yes, because the answer's no. So we really need to get better at trying to train those. And the issue is, you're right, it would be lovely to have that, but for the university needs to recognise that it's a job. If you're going to get involved as a user representative on a major project, then your duties need to go to somebody else. for the period of that project, if you are realistic. Now, some of the larger projects we do have project managers appointed by, or project coordinators or user coordinators appointed by the faculty, but many projects don't really get that degree of involvement.
I saw that two things that I got a little bit, I wouldn't say concerned, but I was a little bit puzzled. You procure the switches, which is something that we do, or your equipment, and then you pass it on to be installed by a third party. Would you not rather be you configuring and installing and doing everything?
It's only the physical installation of it. So what happens on our, typically we get the wireless heads and all the rest of it, and the comms rooms done during the main contract. What will happen then is that our programmers will go into the comms rooms, check everything's working, it's then sealed up, locked, and we're given the keys. So it's that sort of thing. For us to go in and out of a building site is a bit problematic. So the contractors who come in to do this work, they're on our preferred list anyway. So the people we work with all the time, they know how we work, so they're not strangers. So we're comfortable with that, and it has worked well.
All right, so yeah, thank you, Steve. Mark?